In 2005, a serial killer who had been taunting police for 31 years asked detectives a single question: can a floppy disk be traced back to a computer? The police told him no. He believed them. 10 days later he was under arrest, and at the start of his interrogation, his first words were not a denial, they were a complaint. He wanted to know why they had lied to him. That man was Dennis Rader, better known as BTK, and his story is case 1 of this list. He is one of 10 killers who didn't get caught by DNA alone, or a witness, or a surveillance camera. They got caught because of something they said, wrote, tweeted, or sent. A letter, a tweet, 1,000 text messages on a dead woman's phone, a whisper in a bathroom they didn't know was being recorded. In each of these cases, the killer believed they had control over the information. Every single one of them was wrong. Case 1. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Dennis Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and grew up in Wichita. He was the oldest of 4 brothers. His childhood looked completely ordinary from the outside. Boy Scouts, Lutheran church, average grades at school. Underneath that, from the time he was in elementary school, he was secretly killing neighborhood animals. He strangled and hanged cats and dogs. He later said he had developed violent sexual fantasies involving bondage before he even reached his teenage years. He told nobody. He was already very good at being 2 different people at the same time. He joined the US Air Force in 1966 and served until 1970, then came back to Wichita. He married a woman named Paula Dietz in 1971. They had 2 children, a son, Brian, born in 1975, and a daughter, Kerry, born in 1978. He went to Wichita State University and graduated in 1979 with a degree in criminal justice. He spent 14 years, from 1974 to 1988, working at ADT Security Services installing home alarms. He later worked as a compliance officer for the city of Park City, Kansas. He was a Boy Scout troop leader. He was president of the Congregation Council at Christ Lutheran Church. His co-workers at ADT called him the Blue Book Man because he was so rigid about following the rules that he would scold colleagues just for making small talk on the job. That was the man the world could see. The other one started killing in January 1974. Rader had been watching a woman named Julie Otero. He had briefly worked alongside her at the Coleman Company a couple of years earlier. He stalked her family for 2 to 3 weeks before deciding on the morning of January 15, 1974. He parked his car, walked to the Otero house, scaled the backyard fence, and cut the phone line. When 9-year-old Joey opened the back door to let the family dog out, Rader forced his way inside at gunpoint. He told the family it was not a joke. He had a .22 caliber pistol loaded with hollow point bullets. Joseph Otero Sr. was 38. Julie Otero was 34. Their son Joey was 9. Their daughter Josephine was 11. Rader bound them, then strangled them one by one. He strangled Julie first, thought she was dead, then came back and strangled her again because he had never killed anyone before and wasn't certain he had done it correctly. He suffocated Joseph Sr. He watched Joey die. Then he took Josephine to the basement, put a noose around her neck, told her she would be going to heaven to join the rest of her family, and hanged her from a pipe. The 3 older Otero children, Charlie, 15, Danny, 14, and Carmen, 13, were at school that day. When they came home that afternoon, they found their parents and 2 siblings dead. Charlie Otero later said, "It was just like if you ripped my chest open and tore my heart out. My life changed instantly." Rader took Joseph Sr.'s watch and radio as souvenirs, drove the family car to a nearby parking lot, left it there, threw the keys on the roof of a nearby store, and went home. 3 months later, on April 4, 1974, he broke into the home of Catherine Bright, 21. Her 19-year-old brother Kevin was there too, which Rader had not expected. He bound both of them. Kevin managed to break free and escape despite being shot twice in the head. Catherine did not survive. Rader later said the strangulation wasn't working on her, so he used a knife. Kevin Bright is the only person known to have escaped Dennis Rader. In October 1974, a Wichita Eagle editor received a phone call directing him to an engineering textbook on the second floor of the Wichita Public Library. Inside the book was a letter from the real killer. It contained specific details about the Otero murders that police had never released to the public, which confirmed its authenticity immediately. At the bottom, the letter introduced a name the author had chosen for himself: Bind, Torture, Kill, BTK. That letter was the beginning of 31 years of correspondence between Dennis Rader and the people trying to catch him. He killed Shirley Vian, 24, on March 17, 1977, locking her 3 young children in the bathroom so they couldn't see what he was doing to their mother. He killed Nancy Fox, 25, on December 8, 1977, 2 days after her birthday, then called police from a payphone the following morning to tell them to go find her body. He killed Maureen Hedge, 53, on April 27, 1985. She was his own neighbour. He killed Vicky Wegerle, 28, on September 16, 1986, while her 2-year-old child sat in a playpen nearby. He killed Dolores Davis, 62, on January 18, 1991, using a cinder block to smash through her sliding glass door. Between those murders, he kept writing. He sent letters, poems, puzzles and drawings. He sent dolls posed to mimic how his victims had died. He sent cereal boxes, a detail investigators believed was a deliberate joke on the word cereal, stuffed with crime scene photographs and written descriptions of what he had done. He called himself names like the Wichita Strangler, the Asphyxiator, and the Wichita Hangman. He referred to each murder as a project, and to each victim by a code name. Catherine Bright's murder was called Project Lights Out. Vicky Wegerle's was Project Piano, because he had enjoyed listening to her play before he killed her. He described his urge to kill as a demon inside him. His wife Paula often told him she was frightened of the BTK killer and asked him what she should do to stay safe. Rader would comfort her, tell her to keep the doors locked, and later said, "I wasn't really worried, since I knew I was the one doing the killing." After Dolores Davis in January 1991, Rader went completely silent. No murders, no letters, nothing. The case went cold. Most detectives working it assumed he was dead, imprisoned for something else, or had simply stopped. For 13 years, Wichita slowly moved on. Then in January 2004, the Wichita Eagle published a story marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. The article speculated that BTK was probably either dead or in prison somewhere. Rader later said he read it and was kind of bored. He decided to resurface. In March 2004, a letter arrived at the Wichita Eagle, signed Bill Thomas Kilman, an alias Rader made up, claiming responsibility for the 1986 murder of Vicky Wegerle and including a photocopy of her driver's license, which had been stolen at the time of her death, along with photographs of her body at the scene. Police had never definitively connected Wegerle's murder to BTK before this letter. DNA recovered from under her fingernails now gave them a new evidence trail to work with. They began testing hundreds of men across Wichita. Over the following months, more packages arrived, cereal boxes, more drawings, more taunting notes to local TV stations and newspapers. Each one confirmed it was the same man who had been writing since 1974. Each one was studied for fingerprints, DNA, handwriting. Nothing pointed to a name. Then, in January 2005, an employee at a local store found a cereal box in the back of his truck that he hadn't put there. Inside was another note from BTK. This one asked the direct question. If he sent police a computer floppy disk, would they be able to trace it back to him? He was asking the people hunting him whether it was safe to use a new form of communication. Investigators contacted the FBI. Together they agreed on a response. They took out a classified advertisement in the Wichita Eagle addressed to BTK. The ad confirmed that a floppy disk would be safe, that it could not be traced. They were lying. On February 16, 2005, a purple floppy disk arrived in the mail at Fox affiliate KSAS-TV in Wichita. Forensic examiners took it immediately. Using a digital forensics program called EnCase, they recovered a deleted file on the disk. The file was a Microsoft Word document from Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, a record of a church council meeting. The document's metadata showed the name of the last person who had saved it. The name was Dennis. An internet search for Christ Lutheran Church brought up the church's website within seconds. The website listed its council president by name, Dennis Rader. DNA obtained from a pap smear Rader's daughter Kerry had given years earlier at Kansas State University's student medical clinic was compared to the semen found at the Otero crime scene in 1974. It was a familial match, meaning the DNA at the crime scene belonged to a close biological relative of Kerry Rader. Combined with the floppy disk evidence, police had everything they needed. On February 25, 2005, 9 days after the disk arrived at the TV station, officers pulled Dennis Rader over near his Park City home just after noon. An officer asked him, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" Rader replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." He was 59 years old. He had been living in the same area the entire time. Church president, troop leader, compliance officer, husband, father. In the interrogation room, when detectives told him the truth, that they had lied about the disc, that the classified ad was a trap, that they had been waiting for him to send it, Rader did not break down. He turned to Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, the lead investigator on the case, and said, "How come you lied to me? How come you lied to me?" Landwehr replied, "Because I was trying to catch you." Rader then confessed. His confession lasted over 30 hours. He described all 10 murders in precise, methodical detail, using the same project names he had used in his letters. He described what each person said and did in their final moments. He was clinical about all of it. He showed investigators he had been planning an 11th murder before his arrest cut it short. He pleaded guilty on June 27, 2005, to all 10 counts of first-degree murder. On August 18, 2005, Judge Gregory Waller sentenced him to 10 consecutive life sentences, a minimum of 175 years, with no possibility of parole. Kansas had no death penalty at the time the crimes were committed, so that was the maximum punishment available. His wife Paula was granted an emergency divorce in July 2005, with the standard 60-day waiting period waived by the court. He is currently serving his sentences at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. Rader spent 31 years sending letters, poems, puzzles, packages, photographs, and dolls to police and the press. He did it because he needed the recognition. He could not tolerate the idea of his crimes going unnoticed or being credited to someone else. When a newspaper article in 2004 suggested he might be dead, he came back. Not because he had to, not because he was planning new murders, but because his ego could not let people forget about him. He asked police if a floppy disk could be traced. He believed them when they said no. He sent the disk. 9 days later, a man who had lived invisibly in the same city for 3 decades was in handcuffs. The most careful serial killer in American history got caught because he could not stop writing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up is Case 2, Robert Durst, a New York real estate heir worth hundreds of millions of dollars who voluntarily sat down for over 20 hours of recorded documentary interviews about his suspected murders and still couldn't keep his mouth shut when he walked into a bathroom he forgot was still wired for sound. Case 2, Robert Durst. Robert Allen Durst was born on April 12, 1943, in New York City and grew up in Scarsdale, a wealthy suburb in Westchester County. His father, Seymour Durst, ran the Durst Organization, one of the most powerful real estate companies in Manhattan, the kind of family whose buildings shaped the city's skyline for decades. Robert was the eldest of 4 children, which in that world meant he was the one expected to eventually take over everything. When Durst was 7 years old, his mother Bernice died after falling from the roof of their Scarsdale home. Durst later said he watched it happen. Whether it was an accident or a suicide was never definitively established, but by every account, it left a permanent mark on him. He studied economics at Lehigh University, graduated in 1965, then enrolled in a doctoral program at UCLA. He dropped out. It was at UCLA that he met Susan Berman, the daughter of a Las Vegas mobster. They became close friends, a friendship that would last for decades, and eventually be the reason both their lives ended the way they did. He came back to New York, reluctantly went to work for his father's company, and in 1973 married a woman named Kathleen McCormack, a dental hygienist he had met 2 years earlier. Kathleen was 29 years old and 3 months away from finishing medical school when she disappeared on the night of January 31st, 1982. Robert told police he dropped her at a train station in Katona, New York, so she could get to the city. He waited 5 days before reporting her missing. Her body was never found. Before she vanished, Kathleen had told friends and family members that Robert was physically and mentally abusive. Her brother Jim McCormack recalled watching Durst grab her by the hair and yank her off a couch at a family party because she was taking too long to leave. Kathleen had confided to people close to her, "If anything happens to me, don't let Bob get away with it." Investigators suspected Durst from the start, but had no body and no hard evidence. The case went cold. In the years after Kathleen's disappearance, Susan Berman stepped in publicly as Durst's unofficial spokesperson, fielding questions from the media and from Kathleen's family about where she had gone. Berman helped manage the story around her friend. Prosecutors would later argue that this was not simply loyalty, that Berman knew exactly what had happened to Kathleen because Durst had told her. In November 2000, the New York State Police quietly reopened the investigation into Kathleen's disappearance. Investigators wanted to interview Susan Berman, who they believed could tell them things about what happened in 1982. Durst found out the case had been reopened because his sister Wendy tipped him off. He immediately went into hiding. He moved to Galveston, Texas, where he rented a cheap room at a boarding house for $300 a month, wore a wig and women's clothing, and told people his name was Dorothy Siner, the name of a former high school classmate. He told neighbors he was a mute woman. On December 23, 2000, before investigators could speak with her, Susan Berman was found shot dead in the living room of her rented home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. She was 55. She had been shot once in the back of the head at close range, execution style. Nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of forced entry. The day before her body was discovered, the Beverly Hills Police Department received a single handwritten note. It contained Berman's home address, with Beverly Hills misspelled as Beverly, and one word written in block letters: cadaver. Durst denied writing the note. He denied any involvement. He said he had not even been in Los Angeles. 9 months later, in September 2001, a fisherman spotted something in Galveston Bay. Police pulled garbage bags from the water containing dismembered human body parts: 2 arms, a leg, and a torso. A piece of junk mail found nearby traced back to the boarding house where Durst was living. A trail of blood in the hallway led from his neighbor Morris Black's apartment to Durst's room. Inside Durst's apartment, investigators found a bloody knife, the hardware receipt for a saw. Morris Black, 71, had been killed and cut into pieces. Durst was arrested. He posted $300,000 bond, missed his court hearing, and became a fugitive. 6 weeks later, police found him trying to shoplift a sandwich, a newspaper, and a packet of Band-Aids from a supermarket in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. A man who had access to roughly $100 million in assets, caught stealing a sandwich. In his rental car was $37,000 in cash, 2 handguns, marijuana, and Morris Black's driver's license. At trial in 2003, Durst admitted to shooting Black and admitted to dismembering and disposing of the body. He said Black had pulled a gun on him first, that the gun went off during a struggle, and that he panicked and cut up the body because he knew nobody would believe an accident. The jury acquitted him. Because there was no head, it was never recovered from the bay, prosecutors could not establish the exact cause of death and could not disprove his account. Durst pleaded guilty to evidence tampering for the dismemberment and served 3 years. He donated $1 million to a new law library in Galveston after his acquittal. He had now been suspected of 3 deaths. He had been acquitted of 1 murder. 2 cases had no charges at all. His wealth had shielded him at every turn. In 2010, a filmmaker named Andrew Jarecki reached out to Durst. Jarecki had made a film in 2010 called All Good Things, in which Ryan Gosling played a fictionalized version of Durst. After seeing the movie, Durst contacted Jarecki himself and expressed approval of it. That conversation evolved into something bigger. Durst agreed to sit for a documentary series about his life. He would later call this decision a very, very, very big mistake. Over the next 2 years, Durst sat for more than 20 hours of recorded interviews with Jarecki and his team. He talked about Kathleen's disappearance. He talked about Susan Berman's murder. He talked about Morris Black. He was candid in ways that surprised everyone involved. He talked about lying. He talked about running. He answered questions that his lawyers had presumably advised him not to answer. During the filming, Susan Berman's stepson, Sarab Kaufman, found something and gave it to the documentary's producers. It was a handwritten letter Durst had sent to Berman in 1999, about a year before her murder. The handwriting on that letter was compared to the cadaver note sent to the Beverly Hills Police Department on the day before Berman's body was found. They were identical. Same letter shapes, same spacing, same unusual quirk. And both misspelled Beverly Hills as Beverly with an extra E in exactly the same way. Durst had told investigators for years that only the killer could have written the cadaver note. In his final interview for the documentary, Jarecki confronted him directly with both letters side by side. Durst looked at them, blinked, and could not tell the two apart. He kept insisting the note to Berman was his, but the cadaver note was not, even while admitting the handwriting looked the same. After an extended, awkward silence, he put his head in his hands. He excused himself to use the bathroom. He was still wearing his microphone. The production team, listening through their equipment, heard him begin talking to himself in the bathroom, apparently unaware the recording was still running. In the documentary as it aired on HBO, the audio was edited together and presented in this order. There it is. You're caught. You're right, of course. But you can't imagine. Arrest him. I don't know what's in the house. Oh, I want this. What a disaster. He was right. I was wrong. And the burping. I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. The full transcript, which prosecutors later filed in court, and which was played for the jury at his trial, showed that the phrases were not said consecutively in that exact order. The documentary's editor acknowledged rearranging them for dramatic effect. However, both sentences were real. Durst did say, killed them all, of course. He did say, what the hell did I do? Both came from the same bathroom recording, the same microphone, the same unguarded few minutes when he thought he was alone. At trial, Durst claimed he had been mumbling something to himself that the microphone had not fully caught, though what he meant to say was, they'll all think I killed them all, of course. The jury did not accept this explanation. The filmmakers did not immediately know what they had. They discovered the bathroom audio roughly 2 years after recording it, while going through hours of footage in post-production. According to executive producer Zach Stewart Pontier, when they first heard it clearly, when they isolated Durst's voice on the recording, they screamed. The Jinx premiered on HBO in February 2015. The final episode was scheduled to air on March 15, 2015. The night before it aired, on March 14, 2015, police arrested Robert Durst at a hotel in New Orleans. In his room, they found a loaded handgun, more than $40,000 in cash, a fake ID, and a latex mask. He was charged with the first-degree murder of Susan Berman. At trial in 2021, delayed multiple times by the pandemic and by Durst's deteriorating health, as he had bladder cancer and spent the entire proceeding in a wheelchair, prosecutors argued the following: that Durst killed Kathleen McCormack in 1982, that Susan Berman helped cover it up and was the only person who could implicate him when investigators came calling in 2000, and that Durst flew to Los Angeles, shot his closest friend in the back of the head, and sent an anonymous note to police directing them to her body because he believed his voice would be recognized if he called 911. Durst testified in his own defense for approximately 3 weeks. Under cross-examination by prosecutor John Lewin, he admitted he had lied under oath in the past, and that he would lie again to protect himself if he needed to. He admitted for the first time that he had written the cadaver note. He said, "It's very difficult to believe, to accept, that I wrote the letter and did not kill Susan Berman." The jury convicted him of first-degree murder on September 17, 2021. On October 14, 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shortly after sentencing, Westchester County charged him with the 1982 murder of Kathleen McCormack, the case that had started everything. He never stood trial for it. Robert Durst died on January 10, 2022, at a hospital in Stockton, California, while serving his life sentence. He was 78 years old. For nearly 4 decades, money, lawyers, and the absence of a body kept him free. What finally caught him was his own mouth, the words he spoke in a bathroom in 2012, thinking he was alone, thinking the microphone was off, thinking he had survived everything once again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up is Case 3, Chris Watts, a Colorado man who stood on his own front lawn and gave a live TV interview, pleading for his missing family to come home, while already knowing exactly where their bodies were, and while the entire time speaking about them in the past tense without seeming to realize he was doing it. Case 3, Chris Watts. Christopher Lee Watts was born on May 16, 1985, in Spring Lake, North Carolina. He grew up quiet and unremarkable, the kind of person neighbors would later describe as polite but hard to read. He met Shanann Razuchek in 2010 through a mutual contact in Charlotte. She was from Aberdeen, North Carolina, and by every account was the more outgoing of the two, energetic, ambitious, and openly devoted to her children and family in a way she documented constantly on social media. They married on November 3, 2012. The couple eventually moved to Frederick, Colorado, a small suburban town about 27 miles north of Denver. They bought a 5-bedroom house at 2825 Saratoga Trail in 2013. Watts worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. Shanann worked from home selling health and nutrition supplements for a company called Lavelle through a multi-level marketing model, and she posted about her life constantly, her daughters, her marriage, her products, her pregnancy. To the outside world, the Watts family looked like the definition of a happy American household. The reality was different. By 2015, the couple had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, listing nearly $450,000 in liabilities. The financial pressure was constant, and by the summer of 2018, the marriage was quietly falling apart in ways Shanann was beginning to tell her close friends about. She confided that Chris had grown cold and distant. He had stopped wearing his wedding ring, claiming it no longer fit after he lost weight. He had changed the background photo on his phone to sand dunes, no family picture. She told a friend that he told her he was scared to death about the baby coming, that he didn't want it. She said he had changed completely. What Shanann did not know was that since June 2018, Chris had been having an affair with a co-worker at Anadarko named Nicole Kessinger. He had told Kessinger he was in the process of separating from his wife. While Shanann and the girls spent most of July 2018 visiting her family in North Carolina, Watts was at Kessinger's house nearly every night. He hired a babysitter for the girls on the rare occasions they overlapped and took Kessinger on dates, a car museum in Boulder, a drag race at a speedway, a camping trip to Great Sand Dunes National Park. He later said in his prison confession that he never had to plan what he was going to say around Kessinger, that he felt more in control, that it felt like love. On August 9, 2018, Shanann flew to Arizona for a work trip. Before she left, she sent a friend a draft of a letter she had written to Chris about their marriage, describing how much pain she was in and how much she still wanted it to work. She was 15 weeks pregnant. The baby, a boy, was going to be named Nico Lee Watts. She came home in the early hours of Monday, August 13th. Her friend and co-worker Nicole Atkinson dropped her off at the house at approximately 1:48 a.m. and watched until she got inside safely. Inside, Watts was waiting. According to his later confession, he woke Shanann up because he wanted to talk. He straddled her on the bed while they discussed the marriage. She confronted him about whether he was having an affair. He denied it, but told her he didn't love her and didn't think the marriage was going to work. Shanann told him, "You're never going to see the kids again." Chris Watts then strangled his pregnant wife to death in their bed with his bare hands. The conversation had lasted less than 30 minutes. Bella, 4 years old, walked into the bedroom holding her pink blanket. She asked what was wrong with Mummy. Watts told her that Mummy didn't feel good. He then wrapped Shanann's body in a bedsheet and, as Bella watched, dragged it down the stairs. The noise woke up Celeste, who was 3. Both girls were still alive when Watts loaded Shanann's body into the floorboard of his work truck and put Bella and Celeste in the back seat above her. He drove approximately 45 minutes to an Anadarko petroleum oil site in Weld County where he worked. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave in the dirt near the site. Then he returned to the truck for his daughters. He smothered Celeste first with her blanket in the back seat, while Bella sat next to her and watched. Then he carried Celeste's body to an oil storage tank and pushed it through the 8-inch hatch at the top. He went back for Bella. Bella asked him, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" He told her yes. He covered her with the blanket. Her last words were, "Daddy, no." He pushed her body through the hatch of a second separate oil tank. Then he drove home as if starting a normal workday. Back at the house, he staged a scene. He placed Shanann's wedding ring on the counter to make it look like she had taken it off to signal she wanted a divorce. He threw a couples therapy book in the garbage to suggest she had given up on the marriage. He texted Shanann's phone. He called Nicole Atkinson that afternoon and told her the family was on a play date. Even though Shanann's car was still in the garage with the girls' car seats in it, Shanann's purse was inside with her wallet and her lupus medication, and her favourite shoes were visible through the window. Atkinson immediately knew something was wrong. She went to the house, couldn't reach Shanann, and called police. When officers arrived and Chris met them at the door, he walked away from it as soon as it was open, leaving them to let themselves in, a detail investigators noted. When they walked through the house, Shanann's bed was stripped to the mattress, the fitted sheet missing. The master bedroom smelled like cleaning products. The kids' beds were unmade, which Shanann's friends said was completely unlike her. Neighbour Nathan Trinustich offered surveillance footage from a camera pointed directly at the Watts house. Police sat down with Watts to watch it together. The footage showed Watts at 5:15 in the morning, backing his truck all the way into the garage, something Trinustich said was unusual because the garage noise always woke the girls whose bedroom was directly above it. The footage showed Watts loading something into the truck bed before driving away. Shanann and the girls were never seen on the footage at all. While everyone else in the room was fixed on the screen, Watts kept looking away. He glanced at it for a second, then looked at his phone, glanced again, looked away. His neighbour later said it on camera. "If my family was missing, I would be glued to that TV 100%. Watts also appeared on the local news that day, standing on the lawn outside his house, pleading for his family to come home. He said, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. This house is not complete without anybody here." He did not cry. He showed almost no emotion. Investigators who watched the interview were struck immediately by his body language and by something more specific. Throughout the interview and throughout the questioning that followed, Watts kept speaking about his wife and daughters in the past tense. When shown a photo of the girls during interrogation, he said, "She always loved those shoes. And Bella, she always wore flip-flops." Used the word always in the past tense, repeatedly, like a man recalling people who no longer existed, because he knew they didn't. Investigators brought him into a formal interrogation room on August 14th. He denied everything for hours. He denied having an affair. He claimed he had no idea where his family was. Investigators went through his phone and computer records that same night and found his entire relationship with Nicole Kessinger, messages, photos, the works. They contacted Kessinger, who confirmed the affair immediately and said she had believed Watts was separated from his wife. On August 15th, Watts was brought back in and given a polygraph test. He failed. After the test, investigators brought in his father, Ronnie Watts, and allowed the two of them to speak privately in the interrogation room, a calculated decision by the investigative team that carried significant risk but paid off. Watts, sitting with his father, broke. He admitted he had killed Shanann, but he did not admit to killing the girls. Instead, he told his father a story. Shanann had strangled both children in their beds while he watched, and he had killed Shanann afterward in a rage when he found her. He said the girls were blue. When investigators returned, Watts told them this same version. He said he had walked in on Shanann strangling Celeste, had snapped, and had strangled Shanann in response. He directed police to the bodies. On the night of August 16th, investigators went to the Anadarko oil site. They used an excavator to recover Shanann's body from the shallow grave. Then they found the 2 separate oil tanks, where Bella and Celeste had been pushed through the 8-inch hatches. The medical examiner later noted that Bella had scratches on her left side, consistent with being forced through the opening, and that a tuft of blonde hair was found on the edge of one of the hatches. Watts was arrested on August 15th and charged on August 21st with 3 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a human body. In early interviews, his lawyers claimed on his behalf that he had killed Shanann only after she murdered the girls, a story that made him look like a man pushed past his breaking point, not a father who had planned to erase his entire family to start a new life. On November 6, 2018, Watts pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty at the request of Shanann's family, who did not want the case to drag on for years. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Ruchek, addressed him at sentencing. The judge called the murders the most inhumane and vicious he had ever handled. Watts received 5 life sentences, 3 to be served consecutively, with no possibility of parole. He was transferred to a maximum security prison in Waupun, Wisconsin, for his own safety, after other inmates in the Weld County Jail repeatedly threatened him. On February 18, 2019, investigators from the FBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and the Frederick Police Department sat down with Watts at the Wisconsin facility for a 5-hour interview. It was in this interview that Watts told the truth about his daughters for the first time. He described every detail: straddling Shanann on the bed, strangling her, Bella walking in with her pink blanket, dragging Shanann's body down the stairs, putting the girls in the truck alive above their mother's body, the 45-minute drive, smothering Celeste while Bella watched, Bella asking if the same thing was going to happen to her, saying yes, covering her with the blanket, her last words, pushing both bodies into the tanks. He described going home and staging the house. He described texting Shanann's phone. He said, "I don't see how this could happen. Being a dad was the best part of my life. I took it all away." He also said that walking into the polygraph on August 15th, he already knew it was over. "I knew I wasn't walking out," he told investigators. He keeps photos of Shanann, Bella and Celeste in his prison cell. He says he talks to them every morning and every night. He has one of Celeste's books and reads to them. Whether any of that is sincere or performance is something only he knows. What is certain is that the man who stood on his lawn and pleaded for his missing family while speaking about them in past tense, who watched surveillance footage of himself loading their bodies without flinching, who told a story about his wife killing their daughters in the hope that it would carry him through, did not escape his own words. His past tense slips in the TV interview, his flat affect in every interaction with police, his lies to his father about Shanann killing the girls, his confession to investigators 5 months later in a Wisconsin prison. Every version he told, from the first lie to the final truth, was caught on recording. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up is Case 4, Jodi Arias, an Arizona woman who sat for 2 national television interviews after being arrested for stabbing her ex-boyfriend 27 times, slashing his throat and shooting him, and delivered statements so contradictory and so confident that prosecutors later played them at trial as their most powerful evidence. Case 4, Jodi Arias. Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California. She grew up moving between jobs, waitressing, working in restaurants, picking up photography on the side. By the mid-2000s, she had drifted into the world of a direct sales company called Prepaid Legal Services, which sold legal insurance plans and ran its business through a network of independent salespeople who attended conferences and recruited others. It was at one of those conferences in Las Vegas in September 2006 that she met Travis Alexander. Travis Victor Alexander was born on July 28, 1977, in Riverside, California. His childhood was hard. His parents were drug addicts, his mother physically abusive, and when he was around 10 years old, he and his 6 siblings went to live with their grandmother. He found structure in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and built himself into something from nothing, a motivational speaker and legal insurance salesman who was well-liked, socially active, and by all accounts was genuinely fun to be around. His friends described him as handsome, ambitious, and generous. He was 29 when Arias walked up to him in Las Vegas. They hit it off immediately. Within days of that first meeting, Arias ended her long-term relationship with her live-in boyfriend back in California. The two started a long-distance relationship, with Arias driving from California to Arizona to see Alexander regularly. In November 2006, she was baptized into his Mormon faith. Over the course of their acquaintance, the two would exchange more than 82,000 emails. But the formal relationship did not last long. By June 2007, Alexander had ended things. He told a friend around that time that there was nothing about Arias he saw as wife material. He began dating other women. What did not end was the contact. After the official breakup, the two continued a sexual relationship that stretched on for another year. Arias moved to Mesa, Arizona for a period, waiting tables and occasionally cleaning Alexander's house, before moving back to California in spring 2008. Alexander's friends had begun telling him they thought she was stalking him. He reportedly told them she had illegally accessed his social media accounts, sneaked into his house through a doggy door, and followed him on dates with other women. He had his tires slashed on multiple occasions. He told his friend that he had tried to cut her off completely, saying he never wanted to see her again, but then acknowledged, "She's crazy, but she's harmless." By the spring of 2008, Alexander had moved on. He had been spending time with a woman named Mimi Hall, who he had met through his Mormon church community. He was planning to take her on a work trip to Cancun, Mexico in mid-June. Originally, that trip had been planned with Arias. When it became clear she was no longer invited, she was aware of it. In May 2008, her grandparents' home in California was burglarized. Among the items reported stolen was a .25 caliber handgun. Prosecutors would later argue at trial that Arias staged the burglary herself in order to obtain the weapon without a traceable purchase. On June 4, 2008, Arias was nominally on a road trip from California, heading northeast to Utah, where she planned to visit a man she was also seeing. She made a detour to Mesa. What happened inside Alexander's house at 11,428 East Queensboro Avenue that afternoon was captured, almost accidentally, on his own camera. The two had sex. They took photographs of each other. Time-stamped photos recovered from Alexander's camera show him alive in the shower at 5:29 p.m. Then the camera apparently dropped during a struggle and captured images of the bathroom floor, of Alexander's bloody body, and in one frame, Arias's foot. Travis Alexander was stabbed 27 times. His throat was slashed so deeply he was nearly decapitated. He was shot once in the forehead with a .25 caliber handgun. His body was left in the shower. After she left, Arias continued her road trip to Utah and spent time with the man she had been planning to visit, showing no visible distress. 5 days later, on June 9th, Alexander's friends grew worried when he stopped responding to calls and messages. He was supposed to leave for Cancun the next day. They went to his house and found his body. The 911 call that followed identified Jodi Arias by name as an ex-girlfriend who had been stalking him. Detectives flew to California. On July 15, 2008, they arrested Arias at her grandparents' home in Wairika. The detective who made the arrest, Nathan Mendez, later said that his first impression was how unconcerned she seemed. When they booked her into the local jail, she kept asking whether she could fix her hair before the booking photo was taken. When investigators placed her in an interrogation room and Detective Esteban Flores began questioning her, she denied everything for more than 2 hours. She said she was not in Mesa on June 4th. She said she was nowhere near Phoenix. She said she had last seen Alexander in April. When Flores told her there were photographs proving otherwise, she asked if he was sure they weren't from a different visit. He was sure. He showed her the photos. She was placed under arrest. And then, once left alone in the interrogation room to wait for booking, the camera kept recording. The detective had stepped out. Arias, believing she was alone, looked through the trash can in the room, did a headstand against the wall, and sang quietly to herself. The song was "Oh Holy Night." Before the detective left, she had asked him, tearfully, This is a really shallow question, and it's going to reveal how shallow I am. But before they book me, can I clean myself up a little bit? He said no. After he walked out, she said to herself, "You should have at least done your makeup, Jodi, gosh." She was indicted on first-degree murder charges on July 9th, 2008, which was her 28th birthday. She pleaded not guilty on September 11th, 2008. That same September, she sat for a jailhouse interview with the television program Inside Edition. She was composed, articulate, and confident. She told the interviewer that two masked people had broken into Alexander's home while she was there, that they had attacked them both, that they killed Travis but inexplicably let her go, and that she had been too frightened to call the police afterward because she feared they would come back for her. Then she looked at the camera and said, "No jury is going to convict me. I am innocent, and you can mark my words on that." Shortly after that, she gave a second interview, this one to the CBS News magazine 48 Hours. The correspondent was Maureen Marr. Arias again described the masked intruders. She said she had nothing to do with Travis's death. When Mayer asked whether Travis had ever been physically abusive toward her, Arias said he had lost his temper a few times, but that she had never felt her life was in danger. She said she had been able to hide the physical signs of it: arms, legs, torso. It was the first tentative suggestion of a different narrative quietly being tested. That 48 Hours interview, as Arias maintained her intruder story and denied any involvement in the killing, would later become the first interview in the 25-year history of the 48 Hours program to be used as evidence in a death penalty trial. By 2010, the intruder story had quietly collapsed under the weight of the physical evidence. Arias's hair had been found at the scene mixed with Alexander's blood. Her bloody palm print was found on the wall of the hallway. The DNA from the blood trail led directly to her. The camera recovered from Alexander's washing machine, she had apparently tried to destroy it by running it through the wash cycle, had still yielded the time-stamped photos. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no evidence of anyone else in the house. Arias changed her story. She now said she had killed Alexander, but in self-defense. He had been abusive throughout their relationship, she claimed. On the day of his death, he had attacked her after she accidentally dropped his camera, and she had fought back to save her own life. Trial began on January 2, 2013, in Maricopa County Superior Court, in front of Judge Sherry Stevens. It became one of the most watched trials in American television history. The courtroom was packed every day. Cable news networks ran daily coverage. Thousands of people watched it live online. On February 4, 2013, Arias took the witness stand and testified for 18 consecutive days, the longest stretch of self-testimony in Arizona legal history. She described in detail the relationship's sexual nature, claimed Alexander had been physically violent with her on multiple occasions, and said she had no memory of most of the actual killing, only fragments before and after. A defense expert testified she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder that caused a memory gap. Prosecutor Juan Martinez tore into her methodically. He played recordings of her police interrogation, in which she stated flatly and emphatically that she was not in Mesa, that she was nowhere near Travis, and that she had nothing to do with his death. He played the Inside Edition interview, in which she told the intruder story with full confidence and declared no jury would ever convict her. He played the 48 Hours interview in which she expressed complete innocence, while suggesting, for the first time, that Travis had a darker side. He then played her testimony in the same courtroom, claiming self-defense. 3 entirely different accounts of the same event, delivered in her own words, on 3 separate occasions, each one contradicting the last. During cross-examination, Martinez pressed her on the inconsistencies relentlessly. At one point, the jury, which in Arizona is permitted to submit written questions to be read by the judge, submitted over 200 questions directly to Arias during her time on the stand. One of those questions, read aloud in open court, was, "After all the lies you have told, why should we believe you now?" Arias had no satisfying answer. When asked at trial why she had been so certain no jury would convict her when she gave the Inside Edition interview, she offered an explanation that was almost worse than saying nothing. She said that at the time of the interview, she had been planning to commit suicide before any trial took place, and that was why she was so confident no jury would ever see her. She hadn't expected to still be alive. The jury convicted Jodi Arias of first-degree murder on May 8, 2013. The verdict came after roughly 15 hours of deliberation. Two separate penalty phase juries subsequently deadlocked on whether to impose the death penalty, and on April 13, 2015, Judge Stevens sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. She has remained there ever since. In March 2020, the Arizona Court of Appeals upheld her conviction after she filed an appeal arguing the trial's media coverage had been so overwhelming that she could not have received a fair hearing. The physical evidence alone, the DNA, the photos from the camera she put in the washing machine, the bloody palm print, would almost certainly have been enough to convict her. But what the prosecution also had, and used to devastating effect, was a library of her own words. She told one story to police, a different story to Inside Edition, a different story still to 48 Hours, and a fourth version under oath on the stand. Each one was recorded. Each one was played for the jury. The jury foreman, William Zavakos, said afterward that Arias's 18 days of testimony had not helped her. "I think 18 days hurt her," he told ABC News. "I think she was not a good witness. She had told the Inside Edition camera that no jury would convict her. She was wrong, and the recording of her saying it was played in the courtroom where the jury that convicted her was sitting." Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up is Case 5, Scott Peterson, a California fertilizer salesman who called his girlfriend from a fake Paris to wish her a happy new year, while search parties were actively combing his neighborhood for his missing pregnant wife. A phone call that was recorded because police had already wired the girlfriend weeks earlier. Case 5, Scott Peterson. Scott Lee Peterson was born on October 24, 1972, in San Diego, California. He grew up in a comfortable family. His father owned a crate packaging company, and his mother ran a clothing boutique in La Jolla. He was athletic, charming, and had the kind of easy, relaxed confidence that made him easy to like. He attended California Polytechnic State University, where he met Lacey Denise Rocha. She was from Modesto, California, the daughter of a dairy farmer, a cheerful and social person who, by everyone's account, was exactly the kind of person others wanted to be around. They got married. They moved to Modesto, to a 3-bedroom bungalow on Covina Avenue in a quiet neighborhood near a park. Scott took a job with a fertilizer company called Trade Corp, earning around $5,000 a month. Lacey worked part-time as a substitute teacher and devoted most of her energy to making the house a home, cooking, gardening, entertaining. In 2002, she found out she was pregnant. The baby was a boy. They were going to name him Connor. The due date was February 10, 2003. Lacey was visibly excited. Friends described her as glowing. What her friends did not know, and what Lacey herself apparently did not know, was that by November 2002, her husband was sleeping with another woman. Her name was Amber Fry. She was 27 years old, a massage therapist and single mother living in Fresno. A mutual friend had set her up with Scott on a blind date on November 20, 2002. He told her he was single and was looking to settle down. On their first date, he took her to a Japanese restaurant, secured a private dining room, and talked with her until the restaurant closed. They went to a karaoke bar after that and sang a duet. He was attentive, warm, and easy to be with. By all accounts, he pursued her deliberately and with real effort. On December 9, 2002, 15 days before Lacey Peterson disappeared, Scott Peterson sat down with Amber Fry and told her he had lost his wife. He said it was too painful to explain, but that this coming holiday season would be his first without her. Amber, who had no reason to think otherwise, understood that to mean his wife had died. When she asked if he was ready for a relationship, he said absolutely. On the same day he told Amber this, he also spent $1,400 in cash on a small 14-foot aluminium fishing boat. He told no one in his life, not his parents, not Lacey's family, not his friends, that he had purchased it. Family and friends would later testify they had no idea the boat existed. On December 23rd, Lacey called her mother Sharon Rocha at around 8:30 in the evening to confirm they would be coming to a family Christmas Eve dinner the following night. She sounded fine. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Scott told a neighbor he was planning to golf. He did not go golfing. Instead, he drove 90 miles to the Berkeley Marina with his new boat and went, he said, fishing for sturgeon in San Francisco Bay. He returned home in the afternoon to find the family's golden retriever, Mackenzie, in the backyard with its muddy leash still attached. There was no sign of Lacey. He called Sharon Rocher to ask if Lacey was there. She was not. That evening, Scott and Lacey's stepfather both filed a missing persons report with police. Lacey Peterson was 27 years old and 8 months pregnant. The search began immediately. Hundreds of volunteers flooded the neighborhood and surrounding parks. A command center was set up. The case attracted national media coverage within days. From early on, investigators found Scott's behavior odd. When detectives arrived and began asking questions in the hours after the missing persons report, Scott was calm and answered in a way one detective described as scripted and rehearsed. He didn't fire questions back at the officers the way someone desperate to find their wife typically would. Detective John Bueller later described his manner as a strange combination of polite and arrogant, disaffectedly distant and impatiently irritable. He just didn't seem, Bueller said, like a man whose pregnant wife had vanished. On December 30th, less than a week into the search, a Fresno massage therapist called the Modesto Police Department. It was Amber Fry. She had been watching the news coverage and had recognized Scott Peterson's name and description. She told detectives she had been in a romantic relationship with him since November. She told them he had said he was single, and she told them that on December 9th, he had told her he had already lost his wife. That same day, police asked Fry a direct question. Would she be willing to keep talking to Scott while recording the calls? She said yes. Police set up the recording equipment, and almost immediately, Scott called her. Fry later said her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. She was sweating. The police in the room were barely breathing. The recording began. Over the following weeks, Fry recorded more than 29 hours and 40 calls with Scott Peterson. The calls were, in retrospect, stunning in what they revealed. Not through dramatic confession, but through the quiet, casual lies of a man who seemed to believe he had everything completely under control. The most striking call came on New Year's Eve. It was December 31st, 2002. Lacey had been missing for 7 days. Hundreds of Lacey's family members, friends, and community members were gathering that evening for a candlelight vigil in Modesto in her honor. In a call made in the minutes just before that vigil began, Scott called Amber and told her he was in Paris. He described standing near the Eiffel Tower. He said the New Year's celebration was unreal and that the crowd was huge. He faked a bad international phone connection, complained about the time difference, and told her he was there with friends. He even gave her the names of the friends he was supposedly with, Pasquale and Francois. He called her Sweetie. He was not in Paris. He was in Modesto. He was about to attend a candlelight vigil for his missing pregnant wife. On January 1st, in the next recorded call, he told her he was still in Paris. Days later, he began to crack. When Amber pressed him with increasingly difficult questions, he eventually admitted on January 6th that he had been lying. He told her, on the recording, the woman he was married to was named Lacey, and she had disappeared, and he had been in Modesto with her family searching for her the entire time he claimed to be travelling in Europe. When Amber reminded him that he had told her back in December that he had already lost his wife, weeks before Lacey went missing, Scott had no answer. She said to him, recorded and played later for a jury, "Of course you couldn't tell me how you lost your wife because it hadn't happened yet." Scott said, "I don't know what to say to you." On January 24th, 2003, Amber Fry held a press conference. She told the public what she had told police. Scott had told her he was single. They had a romantic relationship. She had no idea he was married. Lacey's family, who until that point had publicly supported Scott, immediately withdrew that support. Sharon Rocher, Lacey's mother, told detectives she now believed Scott had killed her daughter. Meanwhile, the physical investigation was building its own case. Police found that Scott had searched the internet on December 8th, the day before he bought the boat, for information about marina tides, water currents, nautical charts, and boat ramps in the San Francisco Bay and Monterey Bay areas. He bought a 2-day fishing license for the first time since 1994. He had never mentioned to anyone that he fished. Investigators found what they believed were 5 circular marks in the floor of Scott's warehouse, matching the size and shape of a bucket used to make concrete anchors. They found cement powder on the boat trailer. They found a single homemade concrete anchor in the boat. Prosecutors later alleged he made 5 anchors and used 4, tied to Lacey's body, to weigh her down in the bay. A police canine trained to track human scent picked up Lacey's scent at the boat ramp at Berkeley Marina. Forensic testing of a pair of needle-nosed pliers recovered from Scott's boat found a single strand of hair caught in the jaws. Mitochondrial DNA testing matched it to hair taken from Lacey's hairbrush. 3 witnesses also testified at trial that Scott told them he had planned to go golfing on Christmas Eve, not fishing. On April 13, 2003, 4 months after Lacey disappeared, a couple walking their dog at a park along the San Francisco Bay shoreline in Richmond came upon the body of a male fetus in a badly decomposed state. The following day, a jogger found a woman's torso washed up on the rocks about a mile away. Both bodies were identified through DNA testing. They were Lacey Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The location where they were found was approximately 1 to 2 miles from the spot at the Berkeley Marina, where Scott had said he launched his fishing trip on Christmas Eve. Police moved immediately. They had already placed GPS tracking devices on Scott's vehicles. When the bodies were identified on April 18th, officers located Scott near a golf course outside San Diego, not far from the Mexican border. He had bleached his hair blonde and grown a goatee. He was carrying more than $10,000 in cash, his brother's identification, multiple cell phones, camping equipment, and a collection of items including a folding saw, a fillet knife, a double-edged dagger, duct tape, and a shovel. He was arrested. Charged with first-degree murder in Lacey's death and second-degree murder in the death of Connor, he pleaded not guilty. In the weeks before his arrest, while the search for Lacey was still nominally active, Scott had also sold Lacey's car, looked into selling their house, and converted the nursery they had set up for Connor into a storage room. Trial began in June 2004 in Redwood City, California, after a judge ruled the case was too well known in Modesto for a fair local jury. It lasted 5 months. Amber Fry testified for the prosecution. Jurors heard the recordings of the phone calls in their entirety. Scott pretending to be in Paris, Scott describing the crowd near the Eiffel Tower, Scott calling Amber sweetie while volunteers were lighting candles for his missing wife a few miles away. They heard the recording of Amber confronting him about telling her in early December that he had already lost his wife. They heard him say he didn't know what to say. They heard the January 6th call in which he admitted, for the first time, that Lacey was the woman who was missing and that he had been lying about travelling. On November 12, 2004, the jury convicted Scott Peterson of first-degree murder for Lacey's death and second-degree murder for Connor's death. The following December, the jury recommended the death penalty. Judge Alfred DeLucci sentenced him to death on March 16, 2005. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the death sentence, citing significant errors in jury selection during the penalty phase. The murder convictions themselves were upheld. In December 2021, Scott Peterson was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently held at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. He has continued to maintain his innocence, and in 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project announced it had taken on his case, citing new evidence it believes has not been adequately examined. What put Scott Peterson in prison was not a confession. There was no crime scene, no murder weapon, and no witness who saw what happened inside that house on the morning of December 24, 2002. What the prosecution had was a timeline of behaviour, a set of physical connections between Scott's boat and Lacey's body, and more than 29 hours of recorded phone calls in which a man who claimed to be a devoted and devastated husband described himself standing near the Eiffel Tower while search teams were walking through parks calling his missing pregnant wife's name. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up is Case 6, Robert Pickton, a pig farmer in British Columbia who murdered at least 26 women over nearly 2 decades and then confessed to an undercover officer placed in his jail cell, telling him he was only caught because he got sloppy chasing a number he never quite reached. Case 6, Robert Pickton. Robert William Pickton was born on October 24, 1949, in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, about 27 kilometers east of Vancouver. He and his younger brother David grew up working the family pig farm on Dominion Avenue. Their mother Louise ran the household and the farm with demanding, eccentric energy. The boys worked long hours even on school days and showed up to class in dirty clothes that reeked of manure. Other children called Robert Stinky Piggy. He failed grade 2 and was placed in a special education class. He never connected with school and dropped out in his early teens. He went to work as a meat cutter for several years before returning full-time to the farm. When he was 12, he had raised a calf as a pet. One afternoon, he came home to find his mother had slaughtered it. That story got repeated by people who knew the family as an example of what life on that farm was actually like. His father Leonard was largely absent in terms of raising the children. Robert was strongly attached to his mother and barely interacted with his father, who was described as abusive. When both parents died, his father in 1978, his mother in 1979, Robert and David inherited the farm. In 1994 and 1995, the Pickton brothers sold portions of the inherited land to urban developers, collecting a total of approximately $5.16 million. They used the money to keep the property, buy vehicles, and slowly transform parts of the farm into something other than agriculture. By the mid-1990s, Robert and David had converted a building on the property, originally a slaughterhouse, into a venue they called Piggy's Palace. They registered a non-profit organisation in 1996 called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society, claiming its purpose was to put on events for worthy community groups. What it actually hosted were massive, chaotic parties that drew up to 2,000 people at a time, including members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang, local politicians, and business figures. Drugs were common. Sex workers attended. The place became well known in certain circles as a spot where anything went. Port Coquitlam sued the Picktons for violating zoning laws. The brothers ignored the lawsuit and threw a New Year's Eve party anyway. Police shut it down. The charity was eventually disbanded in 2000 after it failed to file the required financial statements. Pickton had been going to Vancouver's downtown east side for years, starting in the early 1980s, when he made regular trips to drop off animal waste at a rendering plant in the area. The downtown east side was then, and now, the poorest urban neighbourhood in Canada, a place where a large proportion of residents were living with addiction, working in the sex trade, and existing on the very edge of survival. A significant number of the women in the neighbourhood were Indigenous. Pickton began offering women money to come back to his farm for sex. Some came. Some did not come back. Women started disappearing from the downtown east side in the mid-1980s. The first name to eventually be connected to Pickton was Rebecca Gounod, who vanished in June 1983. Over the following 2 decades, more than 60 women from the neighbourhood would go missing. Their families reported them missing, advocates raised alarms, and for years, the response from law enforcement was slow and disorganised. In March 1997, a woman who has been referred to in court proceedings by the pseudonym Ms. Anderson, a sex worker from the downtown east side, accepted an offer from a man in a red pickup truck. He offered her $100 to come to his farm in Port Coquitlam. She got in. They drove to the Pickton property, went to a trailer, and she had sex with him. Afterward, she went to the bathroom to inject heroin and cocaine. While she was looking up a number in a phone book, the man came up behind her, caressed her left hand, and snapped a handcuff onto her wrist. He then stabbed her. She managed to grab the knife, slash him across the neck and arm, and run. She stumbled out onto the road, naked and covered in blood, still handcuffed. A passing couple picked her up and rushed her to Royal Columbian Hospital. She had 2 stab wounds to the abdomen, one that punctured her lung, and a wound to her hand. She had lost nearly 3 litres of blood. Her heart stopped twice on the operating table. She survived. The handcuff was still on her wrist when she arrived at the hospital. Robert Pickton turned up at Eagle Ridge Hospital in Port Moody around the same time, with a deep cut to his neck and a wound to his arm. Hospital staff found a key in his clothing. It matched the handcuff still attached to the woman's wrist. Pickton was arrested and charged with attempted murder, assault with a weapon, and forcible confinement. He was released on $2,000 bail. On January 27, 1998, Crown prosecutors stayed the charges. They reasoned that the woman, because of her drug addiction and her failure to show up to several meetings with the prosecution, was too unstable to be a reliable witness. The clothes and rubber boots Pickton had been wearing on the night of the attack were seized by police. They were placed in an evidence storage locker. They sat there, untested, for more than 7 years. When they were eventually tested after his arrest in 2002, the DNA of 3 separate missing women was found on the clothing and on a condom package seized that night. Between the time the charges were dropped in January 1998 and Pickton's eventual arrest in February 2002, at least 19 more women disappeared. Inside the Vancouver Police Department, a detective and geographic profiler named Kim Rosmo had been building a case that a serial predator was operating in the downtown East Side. Rosmo was the first working Canadian police officer to earn a PhD in criminology. His methods of geographic profiling, using the locations of crimes to identify where an offender likely lived or worked, were being adopted by law enforcement agencies around the world. He put forward his serial killer hypothesis formally in 1998 and tried to establish a working group to investigate the disappearances. Senior officers at the VPD dismissed his theory as inaccurate and inflammatory. At a meeting in September 1998, according to Rosmo's own testimony to a later inquiry, a senior inspector threw a temper tantrum and shut down his concerns entirely. The news release warning the public of a possible serial killer, which Rosmo and another officer had been preparing to issue, was scrapped. Rosmo's contract was not renewed. He later sued the department for wrongful dismissal. Meanwhile, the RCMP's own investigation of Pickton had gone largely dormant. The 2 agencies, the Vancouver Police Department and the Port Coquitlam RCMP, were investigating what were effectively the same disappearances from opposite sides of a jurisdictional line and barely communicating with each other. Tips implicating Pickton had been coming in since 1998. A farm worker named Bill Hiscox had called Crime Stoppers that year to report that a man named Willie, who worked at a pig farm, regularly picked up women from the downtown East Side and that they seemed to disappear. In June 1999, a sex worker identified Pickton's photo to police as a man who had recently tried to pick her up and threatened to assault her if she refused. She described him as having a creepy smile and said he seemed to want to devour her in an evil way. In September 1999, RCMP investigators went to the farm to interview Pickton. They couldn't find him. He called the next day and agreed to come in to clear the air. The investigation went nowhere. By September 2001, a Vancouver Province newspaper article quoted a police spokesperson saying it was premature to conclude a serial killer is running loose, terrorizing hookers and junkies. Dozens of women had vanished. On February 5, 2002, RCMP officers executed a search warrant at the Pickton farm. The warrant was for illegal firearms. What they found when they arrived was far beyond firearms. On the property, they discovered a prescribed asthma inhaler belonging to a woman named Serena Abotswe, who had been reported missing since August 2001. That was enough to obtain a second warrant, this one tied to the BC Missing Women investigation. Officers sealed the farm. The Pickton brothers were arrested. Robert was charged with weapons offences and released, but kept under police surveillance. On February 22, 2002, Robert Pickton was arrested again and charged with the murders of Serena Abotswe and Mona Wilson. More charges followed rapidly. By the time the investigation concluded, remains or DNA from 33 women had been recovered from the property, one of the largest forensic investigations in Canadian history, involving hundreds of officers and teams of forensic specialists who spent years sifting through the farm. The night of his initial arrest, RCMP placed an undercover officer posing as a fellow inmate into the holding cell with Pickton. The cell was wired for audio and video. Pickton did not know he was being recorded. He talked. At one point, apparently at ease and eating a bowl of chili, Pickton made a gesture with his hands to indicate a number and then said it plainly. He had killed 49 women. He had been going to stop, he said, but he wanted to do one more first. He wanted to reach 50. He said, I was going to do one more, make it an even 50. That's why I was sloppy. I wanted one more. Make the big 5-0. He also told the undercover officer that getting sloppy with how he disposed of evidence was the reason he had been caught, not smart police work. In the 11-hour formal police interrogation conducted the following day, Pickton initially denied any knowledge of the missing women. As the hours passed, he shifted tactics. He told officers he would be willing to give them information about the killings if they would stop digging up his farm. He eventually acknowledged that investigators might find the remains of probably two, maybe three women on the property. He told detectives that bad police work had allowed him to continue for so long because officers simply couldn't catch him. He said he got too sloppy at the end. At trial, which began January 30th, 2006, in British Columbia Supreme Court, Pickton pleaded not guilty to 26 counts of murder. The judge ruled the case would proceed first with 6 charges to be tried before a jury of 7 men and 5 women. The jury heard the jail cell recording. They heard Pickton describe what he had done in his own voice, in his own words, sitting with a man he thought was just another inmate. The recording was played as evidence. Among the prosecution witnesses was Andrew Bellwood, who testified that Pickton had told him how he killed his victims and disposed of their remains. On December 9, 2007, after a trial lasting nearly a year, the jury convicted Robert Pickton on 6 counts of second-degree murder. The 6 confirmed victims were Serena Abotsway, 29, Mona Wilson, 26, Andrea Josbury, 22, Brenda Ann Wolfe, 32, Georgina Faith Papin, 34, and Marnie Frey, 24. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum sentence available under Canadian law for second-degree murder at the time. The remaining 20 murder charges were stayed in 2010 after the Supreme Court of Canada upheld his convictions because no additional sentence was possible beyond what he was already serving. In 2012, the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry released a 1,448-page final report that detailed in full the systemic failures that had allowed Pickton to operate for so long. The commission found that police failed to properly file missing persons reports, failed to share information between agencies, failed to warn the public, and failed to treat the disappearances as the serious crimes they were. The report concluded that the response would have been very different if the victims had come from a wealthier part of Vancouver. Robert Pickton died on May 31st, 2024. On May 19th, a fellow inmate at the maximum security Port Cartier institution in Quebec had carried out what Correctional Service Canada described as a major assault on him. He was put into a medically induced coma and placed on life support. He died 12 days later at the age of 74. He had been serving his sentence there after being moved from British Columbia for security reasons. The man who said he killed 49 women and was only stopped because he got sloppy died in a prison hospital bed after being beaten by someone he was locked up with. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Up next is Case 7. George Trepal, a member of the High IQ Society Mensa, who poisoned his neighbour's Coca-Cola with thallium and was caught after an undercover detective spent nearly a year befriending him at Mensa murder mystery events, including one where Trepal himself wrote the storyline and it mirrored the actual crime almost exactly. Case 7. George Trepal. Alturas, Florida, is a tiny community in Polk County set among orange groves about 40 miles east of Tampa. In the early 1980s, it had almost no crime, almost no traffic, and the kind of quiet that people moved to deliberately. 2 families lived side by side there, close enough that they shared water from the same well. In one house lived mine worker Perilyn Pye Carr, who went by Pye, and his wife Peggy Jean Carr, born August 29, 1947. Peggy was a waitress. She and Pye had married in 1988. It was a second marriage for both of them, and it brought together a blended household. Peggy's son, Dwayne Dubberly, Pye's son, Travis Carr, and Pye's daughters, Delana and Tammy, along with Delana's young daughter, Casey. The house was loud and lively. Teenagers were around. Music played. In the house next door lived George James Trepal, born January 23, 1949 in New York City, the only son of a police officer. Trepal had graduated from the University of South Carolina in 1972 with a degree in psychology and had studied chemistry alongside it. He was short, paunchy, bearded, and wore thick glasses. He rarely left the house. He worked from home as a computer programmer. He was also a member of Mensa, the the organisation that accepts only people who score in the top 2% of IQ tests. His wife Diana was an orthopaedic surgeon. They had no children. Trepal did not like the cars. The two families had argued repeatedly over the years. Firecrackers, noise, music coming from the car home, the general commotion that came with a full household of teenagers. On at least one occasion, Trepal threatened to kill one of the car children directly. The conflicts were well documented and well known to people in the area. In June 1988, Pi Carr received an unsigned letter. It told him that he and his entire family had 2 weeks to leave Florida forever, or they would all die. The letter correctly listed his mailing address in Bartow rather than Alturas, because the Carr home, like Trepal's home next door, used the Bartow post office route. That was not common knowledge. Pi showed the letter to police. Nothing immediately came of it. On October 23, 1988, Peggy Carr got sick. She developed nausea, pain in her chest and arms and legs, and difficulty breathing. She was admitted to Bartow Memorial Hospital the following day and stayed for 3 days. When she was discharged, she got worse. Her son Dwayne and her stepson Travis started showing the same symptoms. On October 30th, all three were admitted to Winter Haven Hospital. Treating neurologist Dr. Richard Hostler suspected thallium poisoning based on what he was seeing. Within 24 hours, lab tests confirmed it. Peggy's tissues contained thallium. Dwayne and Travis also had it in their bodies. Thallium is a heavy metal element, odourless, colourless, tasteless when dissolved. It had been banned from pesticides in the United States since 1965 and banned by the FDA from any consumer product since 1982. It is so toxic that its sale and distribution are controlled and tracked, available only to universities and research centres. It cannot be bought at a hardware store or ordered online. Exposure causes a burning sensation that begins in the feet and works its way upward, followed by hair loss, neurological damage, paralysis, and in high enough doses, death. The symptoms can mimic other illnesses and take days or weeks to appear, which is part of what makes it so dangerous and so difficult to trace quickly. Peggy's condition got worse rather than better. She never woke up. She lapsed into a coma and died on March 3, 1989, when the family agreed to remove her from life support. Dwayne and Travis survived, but both spent considerable time in the hospital, and both suffered lasting neurological effects. Further testing eventually showed that thallium was also present in the systems of Delana, Casey, and Pi Carr. Everyone in the house had been exposed. The family had vacated the home during the hospitalizations and never moved back. Investigators spent weeks testing everything in the Carr house. They tested the well water, the food, dozens of surfaces. They found nothing until late in the search, when someone noticed an 8-pack of Coca-Cola sitting under the kitchen counter. 4 of the 8 bottles were empty, and all 4 contained traces of thallium. 3 of the unopened bottles also showed thallium. Forensic examination found that the unopened bottles had lower than normal carbonization levels and lower internal pressure than Coca-Cola's manufacturing standards. The caps had been carefully removed and replaced. The lot numbers on the bottles confirmed that the entire 8-pack had been produced together at the same facility. Coca-Cola confirmed it had received no other reports of thallium contamination anywhere in the country and had received no ransom demand or tampering note. The company had a bottle capping machine available in its production facilities. Someone outside the factory had opened those specific bottles, added the poison, and recapped them with enough precision to make them look untouched. Product tampering was a federal crime, so the FBI joined the investigation. Investigators concluded that the person who did this had targeted the Carr family specifically. They had access to the house, likely while the family was out, since the Carrs rarely locked their doors. They had intimate knowledge of thallium, including which form of it could be dissolved into a carbonated drink without producing any visible change or taste. They had equipment capable of recapping bottles cleanly. Police initially focused on Pi Carr as a suspect. That suspicion faded when it became clear that Pi himself had thallium in his body. Then investigators widened their focus and started looking at the oddball next door. When detectives first interviewed George Trepal in December 1988, they asked him a simple question: why would anyone want to poison the Carr family? His answer was memorable. Out of more than 50 neighbours and acquaintances police interviewed during the investigation, Trepal was the only one who said, "Someone must have wanted to get them to move out of the neighbourhood." That was almost word for word the message in the threatening letter the Carrs had received in June, a letter that police had not made public. The more investigators dug into Trepal's background, the more the picture sharpened. In the mid-1970s, a DEA investigation identified Trepal as the chemist and mastermind of one of the largest methamphetamine labs in the southeastern United States, operating out of Charlotte, South Carolina. He was arrested in 1975 and served approximately 2.5 years in a federal prison in North Carolina. The connection to thallium was direct. Thallium nitrate is a chemical byproduct of a specific method of methamphetamine production. Trepal had worked with it before. He knew it intimately. He also told police he knew nothing about thallium, which was a lie provable through his own criminal history. Trepal also owned chemistry equipment in his garage: flasks, bottles, lab tools. A witness had seen a bottle capping machine among his possessions when he moved in. He had written a homemade pamphlet titled "Chemistry for the Complete Idiot: Practical Guide to Chemistry," and police later found another document in his possession called General Poison Guide, which included detailed passages about thallium copied from other sources. There was also an Agatha Christie novel sitting on a table in his home, The Pale Horse, published in 1961, in which the method of murder is thallium poisoning, and the victims don't know what is happening to them until it is too late. The undercover operation police later built was named after that book. The operation was called Pale Horse, and it was run by Special Agent Susan Gorick of the Polk County Sheriff's Department. In April 1989, a small article in the local newspaper advertised an upcoming Mensa Murder Mystery Weekend that Trepal and his wife were organising and hosting. A murder mystery weekend is a social event where participants are given roles and try to solve a fictional crime acted out over the course of a weekend. Trepal had been hosting and designing these events for Mensa members. Police saw the advertisement. Gorick wrote a letter to Trepal under an assumed name, Sherry Gwynn, saying she was new to the area, bored, and looking for an intellectual challenge. She was invited to attend. The event was held at a local hotel. There were 4 fictional murders, each sophisticated and carefully constructed, all centered on a voodoo theme. Each of the 4 fictional murders in the scenario was preceded by the victim receiving a threatening note. Trepal himself had written a booklet distributed to all participants during the weekend. That booklet discussed, among other things, the act of writing a threatening note to a neighbour and then poisoning them. This was weeks after Peggy Carr had died from thallium poisoning. This was weeks after the real Carr family had received a real threatening letter and been poisoned through their Coca-Cola. Gorick was careful. She did not press Trepal for evidence directly. She kept her cover as Sherry Gwynn and made herself easy to be around. She later said she made a point not to threaten his ego or challenge his intelligence, which was the key to his trusting her. Over the following months, she visited him multiple times, was invited into his home, and spent enough time with him to observe his behaviour in detail. She noticed the Agatha Christie novel. She noticed the chemistry setup. She became convinced he was the killer. But convincing a jury required physical evidence, not impressions. In November 1989, Trepal and Diana moved to Sebring, Florida, so Diana could establish a new medical practice. Trepal personally supervised the movers, specifically directing which items would go and which items would stay. The bottle of thallium in the garage stayed. Gorick arranged to rent the Alturas house from Trepal. On December 5, 1989, they entered an oral rental agreement. She mailed a $350 money order as the first month's rent. On December 12th, Trepal confirmed she could move in. That same day, Gorick and a team of crime scene technicians entered the property. In the garage, inside the drawer of a workbench, FBI agent Brecker found a small brown bottle. He removed the cap and saw white powder residue inside. The bottle was sent to the FBI lab in Virginia. The residue was thallium. Trepal was arrested at his Sebring home. Officers found him at the top of his staircase in his underwear. His wife was outraged. He calmly asked if he could put some clothes on. A search of the Sebring home turned up more chemistry equipment, the General Poison Guide, the chemistry pamphlet he had written, police manuals with chapters on death by poison, and additional materials consistent with someone who had spent years studying how to kill and how to avoid detection. He was indicted on April 5, 1990, on 1 count of first-degree murder, 6 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 7 counts of poisoning food or water with intent to kill or injure, and 1 count of tampering with a consumer product. His trial ran from January 7th to February 7th, 1991. More than 70 witnesses testified for the prosecution across 4 weeks of testimony. Trepal's defense attorneys called no witnesses at all, relying entirely on cross-examination to try to poke holes in the state's circumstantial case. The defense argued that the single bottle of thallium in an unlocked garage was not enough to convict, that anyone could have placed it there. The jury disagreed. They deliberated for 6 hours and returned guilty verdicts on all counts. On March 6, 1991, the judge sentenced George Trepal to death. He has remained on Florida's death row ever since, at Union Correctional Institution near Rayford, filing appeals that have all been rejected. His wife Diana divorced him in 1996 and never visited him again. She died in 2018 from complications following a stroke. Trepal maintained his Mensa membership from prison. He has continued to insist he is innocent. The man who spent years studying Agatha Christie murder mysteries, who knew the specific chemistry of thallium inside and out, who wrote a fictional scenario involving threatening notes and neighbour poisonings just weeks after doing exactly that in real life, was put away because he left a bottle of what he knew best, sitting in a drawer he forgot about. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Coming up is Case 8, Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, a former police officer who committed more than 50 rapes and 13 murders across California over more than a decade, evaded investigators for 40 years, and was finally caught in 2018, when his own DNA, pulled from something he threw in the trash, matched evidence left at crime scenes, and then, alone in an interrogation room he thought was empty, he started talking. Case 8. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. was born on November 8, 1945, in Bath, New York. He grew up partly in the Sacramento area of California, served in the United States Navy during the Vietnam era, and later studied criminal justice at California State University, Sacramento, earning a bachelor's degree. He was intelligent and methodical. He understood how law enforcement worked from the inside out. In 1973, he joined the Exeter Police Department in California's San Joaquin Valley, working as a patrol officer. He was eventually promoted to sergeant and put in charge of the department's Joint Attack on Burglary program. The man assigned to stop break-ins was already committing them. The earliest crimes attributed to DeAngelo occurred in the mid-1970s around Visalia, California. Between 1974 and 1975, a person investigators called the Visalia Ransacker broke into more than 120 homes in the area, stealing small items, loose change, coins, jewellery, personal mementos, and going through women's underwear drawers. It was obsessive and strange. Then the ransacker escalated. On September 11, 1975, he attempted to kidnap a teenage girl from her home. Her father, Claude Snelling, a college professor, came outside to stop him. DeAngelo shot and killed him on the spot, then kicked the girl in the face 3 times and fled. This was his first confirmed murder, committed while he was an active duty police officer. In December 1975, a detective named William McGowan set up a stakeout at a Visalia address where the ransacker had been active. When a masked man appeared in the yard, McGowan fired a warning shot and ordered him to stop. The man removed his mask, appeared to surrender, then vaulted over a fence, drew a revolver with his left hand, and fired once at McGowan's face. The bullet struck the detective's flashlight and shattered it. The shooter escaped in the dark. Evidence left behind included shoe tracks and a sock stuffed with coins. It was DeAngelo. He had just tried to kill a police officer while being employed as one. In 1976, DeAngelo moved to the Sacramento area and took a second police job with the Auburn Police Department. That same year, the crimes changed. What had been burglaries became rapes. Starting in June 1976, a man began breaking into homes in the eastern suburbs of Sacramento County, the neighborhoods of Rancho Cordova, Citrus Heights, and Carmichael. He went in through unlocked windows or pried doors while families were sleeping. He wore a ski mask. He carried a flashlight and a weapon. He would shine the light into the faces of sleeping victims, tie up any male in the home, stack plates on the man's back, and tell him that if he heard the plates fall, he would kill everyone. He then assaulted the women for hours at a time. When he was done, he would eat food from the family's kitchen and leave. Sometimes he would leave and come back. He called himself the East Area Rapist, and over the next 2 years, he attacked at least 51 women across Sacramento County, Stockton, Modesto, and Contra Costa County. He taunted police with phone calls. He sent letters to newspapers. He called prior victims at home, breathing into the phone, telling them he would come back and kill them. He had been meticulous in his surveillance before every attack. He would enter the target home in advance, sometimes days before the assault, to leave twine he planned to use to tie up victims and to unlock windows for his return. He knew his victims' names, their routines, the layout of their rooms. In March 1977, he called police and said, "I have my next victim already stalked and you guys can't catch me." That same day, the 15th attack took place. Investigators at the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department knew the attacks were connected. They organized task forces, increased patrols, held community meetings, and distributed composite sketches. The fear that spread through Sacramento area neighborhoods was described by one officer who worked the case as unlike anything he had ever seen. People were arming themselves, changing their locks, sleeping with weapons beside their beds. None of it stopped him. In February 1978, Brian and Katie Maggiore were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova when they were shot and killed. Brian died first. Katie ran and screamed for help. DeAngelo caught her and shot her in the head. 2 people out walking a dog, connected to no prior investigation, simply encountered him in the dark. In 1979, after a series of additional rapes in northern and central California, DeAngelo was fired from the Auburn Police Department for shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent from a store. He was caught, detained, and when officers arrived, he rolled around, talked incoherently, and appeared to be having a seizure. He was later heard saying he had faked the whole thing to avoid getting in trouble. He lost his police job. The rapes in Northern California stopped, and then the murders began in Southern California. From 1979 to 1986, a killer investigators called the Original Night Stalker committed a series of brutal attacks on couples in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties. His method was the same. Enter at night through a sliding door or window, restrain both victims, rape the woman, then kill both of them, by gunshot, by bludgeoning, or both. His victims included Robert Offerman and Deborah Manning in Goleta in October 1979, Charlene and Lyman Smith in Ventura in March 1980, Keith and Patrice Harrington in Orange County in August 1980, Manuela Withune in Irvine in February 1981, Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez in Goleta in July 1981, and Janelle Cruz in Irvine in May 1986. Janelle Cruz was 18 years old. She was his last known victim. After her murder, the attacks stopped. For nearly 2 decades, investigators did not know that the East Area Rapist in Sacramento and the Original Night Stalker in Southern California were the same man. In 2001, DNA testing finally connected the 2 crime series definitively. The combined case was enormous. At least 13 murders, more than 50 confirmed rapes, over 100 burglaries across 11 California counties, spanning more than a decade. Crime writer Michelle McNamara, who spent years researching the case, gave the unknown suspect a single name that captured the full scope of what he had done: the Golden State Killer. McNamara published much of her research online and was working on a book about the case when she died in 2016. The book, titled "I'll Be Gone in the Dark," after a phrase DeAngelo had whispered to one of his victims, was completed by her husband and collaborators and published in 2018. In 2016, the FBI and Sacramento DA's office held a news conference and announced a renewed nationwide push to identify the Golden State Killer, offering a $50,000 reward. The case had the most sophisticated DNA profile available at crime scenes, samples from rape kits, from crime scenes, from items left behind. What investigators needed was a name to match it to. No one in any database matched. In December 2017, Detective Paul Holes and FBI lawyer Steve Kramer uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a publicly available genetic genealogy database where people voluntarily upload their own DNA data to find distant relatives. The profile returned 10 to 20 people who appeared to share the same great-great-great-grandparents as the unknown killer. Genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, a retired patent attorney and biologist who had applied genetic genealogy techniques to other identification cases, led the team that would build the family trees. She and a working group of 5 investigators, including Holes, Kramer, Sacramento DA Lieutenant Kirk Campbell, and investigative assistant Monica Jakowski, spent months constructing family trees reaching back to the 1800s. The largest single tree they built contained approximately 1,000 people. One by one, they eliminated suspects based on age, sex, location, and other factors until a single person remained. On March 18, 2018, investigative assistant Monica Jakowski told the team, "Oh, we just found another guy." That name was Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. DeAngelo was 72 years old. He had worked as a mechanic at a supermarket distribution center for 27 years after losing his police jobs. He was living quietly in a suburb of Sacramento called Citrus Heights, the same general area where he had committed his rapes 4 decades earlier. He had 3 daughters. He was a grandfather. His name had never once come up in the original investigation. Investigators began surveillance. They needed to confirm the match with physical DNA before making an arrest. On April 18, 2018, officers secretly collected a DNA sample from the door handle of DeAngelo's car. They also retrieved a tissue from his curbside garbage. Both samples were submitted to the lab. Both matched the DNA profile from the Golden State Killer crime scenes. On April 24, 2018, Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies moved in while DeAngelo was in the side yard of his home. He stepped outside in a t-shirt, cargo shorts, and tube socks. Officers surrounded him. He offered no resistance. He was arrested without incident. But he did protest as they led him away. His actual words, as his neighbor described it, were, "I have a roast in the oven." He was taken to the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department and placed alone in an interrogation room. He was not being interviewed. Officers were observing from elsewhere, and the room was being recorded. DeAngelo sat in the plastic chair. He stared at the fluorescent-lit walls for close to 2 hours, and then, quietly, with no one apparently listening, he began to talk. According to Sacramento County Prosecutor Thien Ho, who recounted the recording in court during the guilty plea hearing, DeAngelo said, "I did all that. I didn't have the strength to push him out. He made me. He went with me. It was like in my head. He's a part of me. I didn't want to do those things. I pushed Jerry out and had a happy life. I did all those things. I destroyed all their lives. So now I've got to pay the price." He had invented an inner personality named Jerry and was trying to blame the crimes on it. Prosecutors believed this was either a calculated attempt to set up an insanity defense or a manipulation tactic. His defense team ultimately did not pursue an insanity defense. Prosecutor Ho also noted in court that DeAngelo had been observed vigorously doing yard work at his home shortly before his arrest, and that once in custody, he performed what appeared to be confusion and physical weakness, behavior entirely consistent with how he had acted decades earlier in 1979, when he faked a seizure after being caught shoplifting and later admitted he had done it on purpose to avoid consequences. On June 29, 2020, in a Sacramento State University ballroom converted into a makeshift courtroom to accommodate the volume of victims and their families, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. He admitted to a total of 161 crimes involving 87 individual victims across 53 crime scenes. Many of the rapes could not be charged due to California's statute of limitations, but the admission placed them all on record. The hearing lasted hours. Survivors and family members of the murdered stood up one by one and spoke directly to a man hunched in orange jail scrubs and a plastic face shield. One survivor said that when she heard a ski mask or someone shout, "Shut up," she would feel the fear again, and that her only comfort now was knowing he would die in a cell. On August 21st, 2020, DeAngelo was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the 13 murders, plus additional consecutive life terms for the kidnapping convictions. The sentence was imposed by a judge. Before it was read, DeAngelo stood and said, in a thin and raspy voice, that he was truly sorry to the people in the room. One murder victim's sister told the court that for 32 years she had locked her bedroom door every night because of him. After the sentencing, she said, she could finally leave it open. The Golden State Killer had evaded capture for 44 years. He had used his knowledge of law enforcement to stay ahead of every investigation that came close to him. He had watched the search for him unfold on television, at his desk, in his own neighborhood. And in the end, what put him in that interrogation room was DNA he had left on a tissue in a trash can. And what sealed the case was the voice he used to blame someone named Jerry for everything he had done, in a room he thought was empty, but wasn't. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Up next is Case 9, Oscar Pistorius, the South African Olympic sprinter who shot his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp through a locked bathroom door on Valentine's Day 2013 and insisted he thought she was an intruder, until prosecutors pulled more than 1,000 WhatsApp messages from their phones and read them aloud in court, showing exactly what their relationship had been in the weeks before she died. Case 9, Oscar Pistorius, the Blade Runner. Oscar Leonard Carl Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Johannesburg, South Africa. He was the middle of 3 children. He came into the world with a rare condition called fibular hemimelia, meaning he was born without the fibular bones in either of his lower legs. When he was 11 months old, both legs were amputated below the knees. 6 months later, he was walking on fiberglass pegs. By the time he was a teenager, he was playing rugby, cricket, and water polo. A knee injury in 2003 ended his rugby career, and a prosthetist pointed him toward running as rehabilitation. Within a year, he had entered his first 100-meter race. Within 2 years, he had won gold at the 2004 Athens Paralympic Games. He ran on curved carbon fiber blades called Flexfoot cheetahs, and the image of him sprinting on those blades became one of the most recognized sights in world sport. People called him the Blade Runner. He won 6 Paralympic gold medals across the 2004, 2008, and 2012 Games, setting multiple world records along the way. In 2012, in London, he became the first double amputee to compete at the Olympic Games, lining up in the 400 metres against able-bodied runners from around the world. He did not reach the final, but the image of him on the starting blocks at the Olympics was broadcast to every country on Earth. At that moment, Oscar Pistorius was 25 years old, at the peak of his fame, holding sponsorship deals worth roughly $2 million a year with companies including Nike and Oakley. One observer put it simply, if you combine the celebrity of a global sports superstar with the inspiration of someone who had overcome something most people couldn't imagine, that was what he was to the public in 2012. 6 months after the London Olympics, on Valentine's Day 2013, he shot and killed his girlfriend. Reeva Steenkamp was born on August 19, 1983, in Cape Town, South Africa. She attended St Dominic's Priory School in Port Elizabeth, studied law at what is now Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, and graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 2005. She worked as a paralegal and as a model. She was 29 years old, 3 months away from completing the transformation she had worked towards since university. By late 2012, she had become well known in South Africa as a model and television personality, and was known publicly as an advocate against domestic violence. She and Pistorius confirmed their relationship publicly at the South Africa Sports Awards in November 2012. They had been together roughly 3 months when she died. Pistorius's home was at Silverwoods Country Estate, a gated community in Pretoria. In the early hours of February 14th, 2013, Steenkamp was spending the night there. According to Pistorius, the two had gone to bed around 10 p.m. During the night, he got up without his prosthetic legs to bring a fan in from the balcony because the air conditioning wasn't working. While doing that, he heard what he thought was the sound of a window opening in the bathroom. He told the court he was terrified. Crime was a constant fear in South Africa, and he said he believed with certainty that an intruder had come in through the window. He grabbed the 9mm pistol he kept under his bed. Moving down the hallway on his stumps, he shouted for the intruder to get out and told Steenkamp, who he said he believed was still in bed, to call the police. At the bathroom, he heard a sound from inside the locked toilet cubicle. He fired 4 shots through the closed wooden door. He then went back to the bedroom and realised Steenkamp was not there. 3 of the 4 bullets struck her, 1 in the hip, 1 in the arm, 1 in the head. The bullets were black talon hollow point rounds, which expand on impact and are, as the pathologist who conducted the post-mortem noted in court, designed to cause maximum damage. When Pistorius opened the bathroom door using a cricket bat to smash through the wood and reach the key inside, he found Steenkamp still alive, slumped over the toilet. He carried her down the stairs. His neighbour, Johan Stipp, a radiologist, arrived after being woken by the noise. He later testified that the first thing Pistorius said to him was, "I shot her. I thought she was a burglar. I shot her." Stipp checked Steenkamp. No peripheral pulse, no breathing, pupils fixed and dilated. She died from her wounds that morning. Police arrived. Steenkamp's cell phone was found inside the bathroom with her. She was fully clothed. Pistorius was charged with premeditated murder the following day, February 15th, 2013. From the beginning, the prosecution built their case around one central argument. Steenkamp had not been an unknown body behind that door. She had gone into the bathroom after an argument, locked the door, and Pistorius had shot her knowing she was in there. The evidence they gathered around this argument proved to be devastating. The first piece came from the neighbours. Multiple people living in the same gated estate testified to what they heard that night. Estelle van der Merwe, who lived about 98 metres from Pistorius's house, testified that she woke at 1:56 a.m. more than an hour before the shooting and heard what sounded like 2 adult voices, 1 male and 1 female, arguing. She tried to block the noise with a pillow before eventually falling asleep. Michelle Berger testified that she was woken by screaming she described as blood-curdling. She said it was something that left you cold. Her husband, Charles Johnson, testified that he heard both a woman screaming and a man shouting. He called security. He said the screaming stopped when the final shots were fired. Annette Stipp, whose husband Johan had been one of the first people to reach Pistorius's house, testified that she woke at 3:02 a.m. from coughing. She heard what her husband told her were gunshots. She then heard a woman screaming, not crying, screaming, in a high-pitched, terrified voice. She went to the balcony and could see lights on in Pistorius's bathroom. She said, "There was definitely a female screaming for quite a period." She described the screams as sounding like a family was being murdered. She then heard both a male and female voice, and then a second set of shots. After the second set of shots, it went quiet. Pistorius's defense countered that the screaming was Pistorius himself, pointing out that his voice becomes very high-pitched when he is frightened or distressed. They argued the witnesses had heard him screaming in panic after shooting, not Steenkamp screaming before. The defense also argued that some of what neighbours described as gunshots may have been the cricket bat hitting the door. Multiple witnesses, however, remained firm on what they heard. Berger broke down at the end of her testimony, describing how she still relived the experience. The second piece of evidence came from Steenkamp herself, from her phone. Police Captain Francois Moller had recovered 2 BlackBerry phones, 2 iPhones, 2 iPads, and a Mac computer from the house the day after the shooting. He downloaded and analysed the data. The full content of Steenkamp's devices printed to more than 35,000 pages. From within that data, Moller extracted more than 1,000 exchanges between Steenkamp and Pistorius via WhatsApp and other messaging applications. He testified that approximately 90% of the messages were what he described as normal and loving. The couple called each other Angel, Baba, and Boo. They sent photographs to each other, discussed appointments and ordinary daily plans, and expressed genuine affection. But the remaining messages told a very different story about the relationship. On January 19, 2013, less than 4 weeks before Steenkamp died, Pistorius sent her a message accusing her of smoking marijuana during the filming of a reality television show she had appeared in. The tone in his messages was accusatory and controlling. On January 26, 2013, following a friend's engagement party at which Pistorius believed Steenkamp had been flirting with another man, Steenkamp sent him a long and detailed WhatsApp message. Moller read it aloud in court. It was direct, specific, and in places frightening. She wrote that she was not flirting with anyone and was sick that he had suggested it. She described leaving the party early because of his reaction. She described feeling like she was in a relationship with double standards, where she was not allowed to mention a previous boyfriend without him getting angry, while he brought up women he had dated constantly. She wrote that he picked on her incessantly. She wrote that he snapped at her about the way she chewed gum, the way she used accents and voices, the way she showed affection. She wrote, "I'm scared of you sometimes, and how you snap at me, and of how you will react to me." She wrote that she could not be attacked by outsiders for dating him, and also attacked by him, the one person she was supposed to be able to count on for protection. She said she just wanted to love and be loved, and that right now she was very unhappy and sad. Pistorius was visibly shaking in court as the messages were read aloud. On January 27, 2013, Steenkamp sent another message telling Pistorius he had picked on her excessively and that she did everything to make him happy while he threw tantrums. The messages showed a pattern of jealousy, criticism, and her fear of his temper in the 3 weeks leading up to her death. On February 13th, the night before she died, Steenkamp sent Pistorius a message telling him he was an amazing person with many blessings and that she cared for him deeply. Pistorius replied asking her to stay the night. She texted a friend she had been staying with, "I'm staying in PTA again, it's so far to drive. I just decided to stay here today and work. See you for Valentine's Day." It was the last message she ever sent. She died in the early hours of the following morning. The trial began on March 3, 2014, at the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, broadcast live in South Africa. The first South African trial to be televised that way. Pistorius sat through testimony about ballistics, forensics, screams heard in the dark, and the contents of Reeva Steenkamp's phone. He wept, howled, and on at least one occasion vomited in court when pathological details about her injuries were read into the record. He testified for 5 full days and was cross-examined for 5 more. Prosecutor Gary Nell was relentless. He told Pistorius directly, "You will blame anybody but yourself. You are lying. You just refuse to take responsibility for anything." On September 11, 2014, Judge Thokozile Masipa delivered a verdict that Pistorius was not guilty of murder, but guilty of culpable homicide, the South African equivalent of manslaughter, meaning she found the killing was unlawful, but not intentional. The public reaction in South Africa was furious. On October 21, 2014, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He had served 10 months when the Justice Minister blocked his expected parole release following mass public outcry. He was eventually released to house arrest in October 2015. The state appealed. On December 3, 2015, a 5-judge panel at the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned the culpable homicide conviction and found him guilty of murder, applying the doctrine of dolus eventualis, a legal principle that holds a person guilty of murder if they foresaw that their actions could result in someone's death and proceeded anyway, regardless of whether death was their direct intention. On July 6, 2016, Masipa sentenced him to 6 years for murder. The state appealed again, arguing the sentence was too lenient. In November 2017, South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal increased the sentence to 13 years and 5 months, with eligibility for parole after serving half. In November 2023, a parole board found that Pistorius had served the required portion of his sentence. On January 5, 2024, after serving approximately 8.5 years in prison and 7 months of house arrest, Oscar Pistorius walked out of Atteridgeville Prison in Pretoria and went to live at his uncle's home in Waterkloof under strict parole conditions. No alcohol, no contact with media, mandatory anger management therapy, and mandatory programs on gender-based violence. He will remain under supervision until 2029. Reeva Steenkamp's mother, June, said in a statement that there can never be justice when a loved one doesn't come back, and that no amount of time served will bring Reeva back. She said her family, who remain behind, are the ones serving a life sentence. The texts Reeva Steenkamp sent in the weeks before she died were not written as evidence. She was writing to her boyfriend, privately, on her phone. She could not have known they would one day be read aloud in a courtroom to a country watching on television. But they were, and in them, she had already described in plain language exactly what kind of danger she was living with. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Up next is the final case, Case 10. A man who walked out of court after prosecutors couldn't make a murder charge stick, went straight to social media and typed out the very words that handed them everything they needed to put him away for good. Case 10. Ronald Heron, the tweet that buried him. Ronald Heron was born on March 30th, 1982 in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in the Gowanus Houses, a public housing complex in the Boerum Hill section of Brooklyn. His father was a crack addict. His mother was a shoplifter. He was raised largely without stability, in a neighborhood where drug trafficking and gang violence had been the norm for years before he arrived. By the time he was 12 years old, he had watched a childhood friend get shot and killed by a police officer on the street outside. By the time he was 14, he had been arrested for armed robbery. He served time in a youth detention facility and came out as a member of the Bloods street gang. The Bloods in Heron's world were not a vague affiliation. They were an organised criminal enterprise, and the specific faction Heron joined was called the Murderous Mad Dogs. Over the years, he worked his way up until he was running the operation himself. His territory covered two neighbouring housing developments, the Gowanus Houses and the Wyckoff Gardens, and his organisation dealt crack, cocaine and heroin. Extortion, robbery and violence were part of how the operation stayed in business. The people who got in the way, tried to compete, or failed to follow his rules either got hurt or died. From 1998 onward, Heron and his gang operated with the kind of control over their territory that came from making sure anyone who saw anything knew better than to say anything about it. On June 16, 2001, Heron shot and killed a man named Frederick Brooks. Brooks was a local drug dealer, and the killing was connected to the narcotics trade that Heron ran. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in New York State Court. The case went to trial in 2002, and then the prosecution fell apart. Two key witnesses who had information about the killing refused to take the stand. According to federal prosecutors who reviewed the case years later, those witnesses stayed silent because Heron and his associates had threatened them. Without their testimony, the state could not make the case. Heron was acquitted of the murder charge. He walked out of court having beaten a killing that every person close to the situation knew he had committed. He also pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges from the same period and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He served that time at Southport Correctional Facility in New York and was released in July 2007. When he came out of prison, Heron decided he wanted to pursue music. He began going by the name Rader and started recording and performing rap music. In March 2010, he launched a YouTube channel called Van Gogh Dent and began uploading music videos. He collaborated with other New York rappers, most notably Uncle Murder, whose legal name is Leonard Grant, forming a group they called the Murder Team. He also recorded songs featuring Waka Flocka Flame, a well-known Atlanta rapper with a national following. The videos went up on YouTube and attracted real views. His song Eulogy, released in June 2010, had passed 1 million views as of 2025. The problem was the content. Heron's music was not abstract or metaphorical. In the videos, he identified himself by name as the leader of the murderous Mad Dogs set of the Bloods. He rapped about having members of his crew carry out shootings on his orders. He talked openly about running the drug trade at the Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens developments. He appeared in videos with weapons. He rapped about having previously beaten a murder charge. In street slang, the phrase he used was beat a body. He posted on Twitter with the same message, that he had beaten a stabbing charge, beaten an attempted murder charge, and beaten the murder case. The tweets were public. Anyone with a phone could read them. Then he kept going. In October 2010, police stopped Heron outside a nightclub in Brooklyn. A search of his vehicle found a loaded firearm and body armor. He was arrested and charged with drug offenses. He had already been in federal crosshairs since before that night. Investigators with the FBI and the NYPD had been building a racketeering case against him for some time. But the tweets and the videos accelerated everything. Prosecutors began treating the social media posts not as rap music or bragging, but as evidence, specifically as admissions by a man who had committed crimes and wanted people to know about it. On February 13, 2012, a federal grand jury handed down a superseding indictment. Heron was now charged with 3 counts of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, racketeering, murder in aid of racketeering, murder conspiracy, robbery, illegal firearms possession, and narcotics trafficking. The 3 murder charges covered Frederick Brooks in 2001, Richard Russo in 2008, and Victor Zapata in 2009. The Brooks murder was the one he had already been acquitted of in state court. Federal prosecutors were bringing it back. New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly stood at a podium and addressed the tweet directly. He said that Heron had bragged online about getting away with the murder and added, his tweets were premature. The 2 new murders were equally straightforward in terms of what the evidence showed. On May 9, 2008, Richard Russo was killed in an elevator inside the Wyckoff Gardens housing complex after a confrontation. In 2009, Heron chased down rival drug dealer Victor Zapata through the courtyard of the Wyckoff Gardens buildings and killed him there. Both men were connected to the drug trade. Both killings were carried out in the same housing developments where Heron's organization operated. The trial began in federal court in Brooklyn and ran for approximately 5 weeks. More than 50 witnesses testified for the prosecution. That number alone was a sign of how much had changed. In the 2002 state trial, witnesses had refused to testify because they were scared. In the 2014 federal trial, they came forward, some of them cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences, others willing to finally speak because the case was being handled at the federal level with the full weight of the FBI and the US Attorney's Office behind it. One witness, Saquon Wallace, was a former associate of Heron's who was already serving a 30-year sentence for his own convictions. He testified in detail about the operations of the murderous Mad Dogs, including an incident in which Heron had instructed him to put on a wig, lipstick, and makeup as a disguise to get close to a target. The government also called a linguistics expert to analyze Heron's rap lyrics and explain to the jury that specific lines in his songs tracked with specific events in the criminal investigation. Several music videos were played for the jury in their entirety. Prosecutors argued that the songs were not fiction, they were Heron describing what he had actually done, in a format he chose to release publicly, on YouTube, where anyone could watch. Heron took the stand in his own defense. He testified that he had grown up around violence, that his experiences in the Gowanus houses had shaped his perspective, and that in 2007, after his release from prison, he had made a genuine decision to leave that life behind and pursue music. He said a music promoter had encouraged him to write about his past. He said the lyrics were drawn from things he had seen and experienced growing up, not direct accounts of crimes he personally committed. He said the line about "beat a body" was simply part of the persona, the language of street rap, not a confession. He said the cemetery references in his songs were just ad-libbing. "I wasn't directing it at anyone in particular," he told the court. The jury did not believe him. On June 26, 2014, Ronald Heron was convicted on all 21 federal counts. The verdict covered racketeering, all 3 murders, the narcotics trafficking conspiracies, robbery, and firearms offences. He was 32 years old. After the verdict was read, US Attorney Loretta Lynch, who would go on to become the 83rd Attorney General of the United States, said publicly that Heron had styled himself a rap artist, but the evidence proved who he really was. She described what he had done to the community where he lived as brutal, unrelenting violence carried out while he glorified his own criminal lifestyle. At sentencing on April 2, 2015, Heron addressed the courtroom before the sentence was read. He said, "You can sentence me to 10 life sentences. I'm only going to die one time, and God have mercy on us all." United States District Judge Nicholas G. Garifis then sentenced him to 12 terms of life in prison, plus an additional 105 years. The sentence runs consecutively, meaning the terms stack on top of each other. It was not a formality, it was a message that the federal system intended him to die in a cell, no matter what happened. He was transported to ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal Supermax facility, sometimes called the most secure prison in the United States, where inmates are held in isolation for 23 hours a day. Frederick Brooks died in 2001. Richard Russo died in 2008. Victor Zapata died in 2009. For years, the man responsible lived freely, ran a drug operation, recorded music, posted videos to YouTube, and tweeted about how the justice system had failed to touch him. The tweet that got him re-indicted was 2 words long. It was 5 characters. He posted it publicly, from his own account, with his name on it. And when federal prosecutors found it, they saved it, printed it, and eventually walked into a courtroom and read it to a jury. Beat a body. 4 words in the end that meant he would never leave prison. This video has covered 10 killers who were undone by their own words, from Dennis Rader, who asked police if a floppy disk could be traced and didn't know they were lying to him, to Robert Durst, who walked into a bathroom wearing a live microphone, to Reva Steenkamp's private messages being read aloud in court after her death, to a Brooklyn gang leader who tweeted a confession in plain English for anyone to see. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.